Before we dive into today's episode, I just wanted to take a minute to say that I have some exciting news to share about our guest, Megan Eckert. Since our conversation, Meg has competed in the 6 Days in the Dome race event in Milwaukee that we referenced during the conversation. And during that event, she achieved an absolutely astonishing total of 526 miles. Just let that sink in for a minute. This incredible feat places her fifth on the all-time women's list for the 6-day event, all time, and second in the U.S. behind only Camille Herron. Just a truly remarkable and completely bonkers statistic and effort. Stick around to hear what Megan had to say during our chat and join me in congratulating her on this phenomenal achievement. Now let's get started. Well, hello and welcome. If this is your first time with us, thank you so much for stopping by. You're listening to Choose to Endure, the show dedicated to the non-elite runners where we share stories, interviews, gear, and training tips, usually specific to the tail-end heroes of the ultra universe. If you haven't had a moment to do so yet, please consider heading over to your favorite podcast app, hit follow, rate the show. If you're on Apple, maybe even leave us a short review too. My name is Richard Gleave. I have been running ultras since 2017. I have taken on and finished numerous distances all the way up through 220 miles, and I'm unashamedly a member of the back of the pack, just like most of you guys. Now, most of the time on the podcast, we enjoy some trail-related conversations with fellow back of the pack runners, but every now and again, we have the opportunity to take what you might call a buttery side trail. And so here in the studio with me today, I am very honored to welcome the fabulous Miss Megan Eckert, who is definitely not a back-of-the-pack runner. Now, Megan started her running journey less than a decade ago and fell into the sport after a little encouragement and some convincing from others. Now she enjoys training and competing on roads and trails alike, determined to see just how far she can go, which at the moment, folks, has taken her 65 yards, 270.85 miles, and all the way onto the USA team at Big's Backyard World Championship this coming October. Not only that, but she is also a high school cross-country and track coach, hoping and helping to inspire the next generation of amazing runners. Wow, that's incredible, and this is going to be an excellent chat. So stick with us. We'll be right back, quicker than a dog spotting a squirrel.
Discover raw, inspiring stories from runners who've been right where you are. This is the Choose to Endure Ultra Running Podcast. With your host, he's English, not Australian, Richard Gleave.
So Megan, incredible to have you on the show. Thank you so much for sparing a little of your time to talk with us today and allowing us maybe to pick your brain a little. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much, Richard, for having me on. I'm so excited to speak with you today.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. Now, it definitely seems like you've come a long way since you started your running career. But as we mentioned in the intro, it maybe took a little bit of pushing to get you started. And that's something I think is quite common with what is the listener base on this podcast. So, was there a moment or maybe an experience or event that transitioned you from somebody needing a bit of encouragement from others to run to somebody who was actively choosing to pursue ultra running? Was there a turning point, a race or an event that really sort of kicked all this into gear for you?
There wasn't a specific turning point. There was a community that really drew me in when I first started running. My husband was convinced he wanted to run trails and he wanted me to do it with him. I was not so convinced. I was a late in life runner, started just before I turned 30. Wasn't so sure of trail running itself. But this group kept having me come out and run out in the hill country nature area. There'd be, hey, we're going to go run 5-10 miles on this Saturday. Why don't you come join us? So I would come and run with them. And through the progression of running with them and listening to their stories, because a lot of them had been on trails for at least a decade or more in their experiences, I fell more and more in love with the trail running community and trail running in general.
So when did you first realize as part of that, hey, I might actually have some talent here?
I'm not sure when. That's a hard question to answer because I still don't believe that I'm at where I'm at right now and my body is able to perform the way it is.
Yeah, well, maybe we'll take a look back then at some of your first ultra races that you signed up for. How did those races go for you as a starter race? Were there any challenges that you can think back, and how did you get by those?
So I was lucky. My first ultra was very challenging. It was a night race at Pedernales Falls, and it was in the middle of Hurricane Harvey.
Oh my gosh.
So they still held the race. It was my first ultra distance. I had run a trail marathon. I had had some experience on trail, but it was my first ultra distance.
Yeah.
And they still held the race because the storm was supposed to cut further east. So I believe, if I remember correctly, it started at 8 p.m. and it had just started raining when we started. And if you've ever been at the park, there's a big granite dome up top. And it started drizzling a little bit. So our first lap, it was a 3-loop 60K. And our first lap, it wasn't bad. It was a little slick on top. You had to watch your footing, but you weren't going to fall. And then that second loop, the puddles started forming. And it's pour, like at this point, it's pouring. And I was so inexperienced. I was out in the woods. My headlamp was dimming. I thought I was losing my eyesight. All I needed to do was replace my batteries, which somebody pointed out to me that was probably what I needed to do. And I'm so grateful for that individual, because I would have just kept running thinking that I was losing my eyesight, you know? And then the third loop, it was just that granite dome had turned into a giant puddle. It was, there was no way around it. You were splashing through the water. Your socks were wet. Your shoes were wet. You were soaked. Everything was muddy. I remember, though, just everybody was going through the same experience. Everybody was getting muddy. Everybody was soaked. Everybody was cold. And yet it seemed like everybody I ran into was still smiling and laughing and cutting up and having this great time. And that, I guess, if we're in a turning point, it was probably that. That's where I saw the trail running community at its fullest, I would say, for the first time, where it was, we're in this miserable condition all together, and we're all somehow having a great time out here.
Yeah, that shared trauma really does help with bonding and the community aspect of it, which I think is great. Now, were you running that by yourself?
Yeah, I was running it by myself. There were some others from the group that were running other distances, and maybe even the same distance. I can't remember now, but there were other people I knew out there from our group, but I was running solo in that.
Fantastic. And then, so fast forward to, I think it's 2018 here in Houston. Well, I say here in Houston, it's not quite in Houston, but the Habanero 100.
Yeah.
Because I think now you won that race outright. And folks, if you're not familiar with that race, that's a very challenging race from a heat perspective. It's called the Habanero for a reason. It's usually very hot. It's in August, if I remember correctly, and it starts at midday, and it's really, really hot here in Texas in August, as you might imagine. So first of all, congrats you won that race outright.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. So I'm super curious, having looked at that and others, like where conditions are extreme, or now that you're getting long to extreme from a distance perspective, how do you go about managing your pace and your energy?
So like training for Habanero, for example, I was afraid of the heat. And I knew that was going to be something that I would have to face in Habanero because of the start time and everything else. So I really focused on what I was afraid of in training. So I would go out at 1:00 in the afternoon and do my long run, or I would drive around with my windows up in the heat, going in my car in the middle of summer and just facing whatever it is I'm afraid of, in the same way that where I'm going now with these distance and these timed events, facing those distances and getting some experience under my belt. I do lots of runs during the day.
Yeah.
And even when I wake up in the morning, some of you all may know I run commute to my job, and I run commute home. And There's mornings that I get up and I don't want to do that, but I know I know what I'm doing. I'm doing that distance, and the legs start to get tired, or the mind starts to not want to go. I can rely on those mornings that I got up and I still ran to work. I still did those things. So I think it's facing what we're afraid of head on, whatever race it may be, and putting that in our training as much as we possibly can. Now, I don't know what it looks like to go 300 or 400. That's an unknown, and you can't train for something like that. But you can train your mind to kind of get ready for those distances.
Now, did you pick habanero because you were afraid? Why did you pick habanero when you originally were thinking through, if you can remember back? Was it because, hey, you know what, that's something that's giving me the heebie-jeebies. I know that's a good thing to go do then. Or did you have some other reason for picking habanero?
It definitely was my first 100-miler. I knew I wanted it to be tough.
Yeah.
I knew I wanted it to be a race that I had to fight for. And at the time, there had been one other female runner, I believe, and I could be wrong. There might have been two, but there was just a handful of female runners who had completed that race. And very few people in general at that time had completed that race. It was just a tough race. So I knew I wanted to try something that would challenge me. So yeah, it was definitely the appeal of what could go wrong that drew me to that race.
Well, apparently not much did. I mean, you won the race outright. So either not much went wrong, or you managed the strategy really well going in and then during the race. I mean, I get that you train for that in the heat, which is awesome in advance, but how did you handle that during the race? Are there any tricks for running in heat that you picked up either before, during, or thought back after that particular race? Because it's brutal out there.
I think for that race, if I remember right, and it was quite a few years ago, but if I remember right, I told myself if I was walking at any point in time that I would either be drinking water or taking in electrolytes or eating. If I was walking, I was taking in fuel of some sort. I remember I covered up white clothing. I think I had arm sleeves. It might have not all been all white. I think I had a tank top, but I kept a hat on the whole race. And women, ice in the sports bra is a game changer. Definitely something where we get to do that's great. Quick cool down. But no, honestly, going into that race, I had no idea of how to manage myself out there. I tried, did the best I could, and it turned out well. I've learned since other little tips and tricks for taking an electrolyte, such as putting salt on your oranges or watermelon, and personally I like beer salt. That's my thing. The lime flavored beer salt goes on. I'll carry it in my pack, but that's one of my favorites. But just balancing electrolytes and water. My husband had an instance where he was taking in too much water at one of his races, and I had never seen anything like this. This was really, really early on, and he started to swell, like his hands, his face. So he ended up, the race director pulled him from the race, thank goodness, and was like, you need to get salt in you. And then he took 20 salt capsules before he
gosh,
was able to get rid of some of all the bloat.
Yeah.
So it is something to be really mindful of, not to, scare people, but it is something. Since Hobbs, I've become much more aware of how much electrolytes I'm taking in and making sure I'm getting enough.
Yeah, that race seemed like it went really well for you. And from a guy perspective, I don't know that ice in the shorts has the same kind of effect as the sports bra. I'm not sure. Maybe I'll try it though.
Arm sleeves, though. You can do the arm sleeves.
Yes, definitely the arm sleeves, and maybe one of those neck bandanas with ice shoved in there for sure. Yeah. But I don't know that ice in the shorts probably does the same thing.
Probably not.
Probably not, no. But that race seems like it went well. You've done a lot of races, I think 60-odd races at this point in your career across the decade there. Yeah. Are there any races there where things didn't go quite so well during the event? And how did you work through that?
I've been really lucky because I don't really look back and see as any of my races, even the ones that didn't go quite according to plan, I don't consider the whole race to go poorly, because there's always little things to learn here and there, right?
Yeah.
And I have never had a race where, like, continuously from start to finish, I haven't felt great. I've had moments in time, though, and I think we all can attest to those moments in time where it's like, why am I out here and doing this again? um,
Yeah.
and, those moments, for me, I like to reflect, and it's always been this way, even when I first started running, reflect on the fact that I'm able to be out here. And even if I'm not moving quickly, even if I'm a little mad that it's another downhill or whatever it may be, I'm able to get out here and I'm able to experience this beautiful world we live in, honestly, on foot. And that's pretty cool. So I go back into the mental game, I guess, when I get in those tough moments.
Yeah, it seems like you've really upped your mental game over time, and maybe that factors into where I wanted to go with you, because you had a lot of success in the standard fixed distance races, but then over the last few years, it really looks like you've started leaning more and more into the timed races and the backyard style races. So I was curious, what has drawn you into that particular format of ultra running?
Initially, I had signed up for Snowdrop, which is a wonderful race in Houston that they do every New Year's. And I had done that solo, and that was 2 years ago was my first Snowdrop experience solo. And I met a lovely gentleman there who said, I think you would be really good at timed events. So he planted that little bug.
Okay.
And so since then, it wasn't anything that I planned on actively pursuing, but I really enjoyed the whole experience of having a timed event and having no finish line and not really knowing how many miles I was going to be able to go or how many miles I want it to go. I kind of actually am drawn, I'm finding, to that open-ended format.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one when you remove the fixed distance, and it's just kind of, it could go on the backyard side. It goes on forever, theoretically, until the last person is standing and completes the yard. So I just think that's a completely different mental game. Going back to our conversation a minute ago, that whole mental space, it looks like your trajectory is really strong on that. And that's really kind of what I wanted to get into. In those races where the clock dictates the end rather than the distance, or in the backyard where there isn't an end, like how do you prepare mentally and physically for those races? Is that a different strategy that you use from, say, the fixed distance racing that you've been doing?
In a lot of ways, it's very similar because you are still out there for time. So there is, well, a backyard, there's not. Okay, a backyard, excluding the backyard, if we're talking about just a fixed timed race or a fixed distance race, I find that I can prepare for them very similar because there is an end point. There is an end point for a 100-miler. It may be different for a different time for individuals. And then there's the same thing for a timed race, right? It's going to end at 34 and you know when it's going to end. But for a backyard, it is very, very different because it seems simple. It seems, I think it's 14 minutes and 31 seconds a mile or something along those lines. It seems something that would be very, very easy to do. But as the distance accumulates and you're looking around and you're like, oh, that person looks strong and that person looks strong. And I don't know if I feel as strong as they do. And how long is this going to go? You do really have to dig into a different mental state where it doesn't matter how long this goes. I'm still going to be out here because I can still do the distance. It has to become, what I have found for me personally is it has to become my own race.
Interesting.
Nobody else is out there. It's just me running 4 miles every hour at the top of every hour.
And how fast do you feel like that takes over? Do you start with that mindset, or do you start like chatty with other folks and, I'm assuming you get to know a lot of the people since you're doing the same route over and over and over. How fast do you get into that? It's really just me. And you mentioned like, oh, that person looks strong, or maybe I'm not feeling as strong as they look. Like, how quickly does that come on for you?
I find I like to, the last one I didn't do as great as going back into it's just my race and it's just 4 miles. You know, the one prior to that in Arizona, I did a very good job of getting myself to that point where it was just I was doing my own 4-mile loop every hour. And I found that the one in Arizona came rather quickly, where it was probably the somewhere midway second day, about 38 hours in, 40 hours in, where I started just doing my own race, running my own race.
Now, you ended up doing now I'm going to butcher the name of this. You might be able to tell me. Is it the Saguaro Showdown?
Saguaro Showdown, yes.
Saguaro Showdown. Yeah. What motivated you to sign up for that initially? And then knowing that potentially a win in that race would get you an automatic qualifier onto the U.S. backyard team. How was your headspace and mentality going into that? I'm assuming you were aware of that and that's why you signed up. But did that make a difference going in? Was that, anxious, stress? Did it add to that?
A little bit. I was very excited going into Saguaro. It wasn't in my plans even on January 1st. It was suggested by a friend. Again, peer pressure gets us into some of these things. And so it was a week before the race that I actually signed up.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Wow.
Wasn't even sure. Backyards. It was my first backyard. Very, very new experience for me. Wasn't sure if I had everything I needed. Showed up without a crew. It was...
You did it solo as well.
I did for a while. And then at 42 hours, one of the other runners and crew members came over and they became my crew. And I couldn't have done it without those gentlemen who jumped in.
Yeah.
But going into Saguaro, I knew what was available if I was able to pull it off. But my main goal was to get to my previous distance PR, which was 2:17. I wanted to get past that. So my goal was 2:20, and then I would carry on from there.
My goodness. Yeah. So tell us how that race played out. I mean, you kind of hinted that, hey, I went into this with not much history of doing these races. Well, that was your first, and no crew. So, goodness me, how did the race go?
The race went incredibly well. I really enjoyed the course, for starters. The first 24 hours was a lot of fun because there were so many people who continued to stay out there through the 24 hours. And we were all running together. And first night, people are playing music and singing down the trail. And first night was just a blast, up until about 24 hours in, and we started seeing more and more people drop. And those of us that were left, I think there were 7 of us for quite a while, just 7 of us. We became a close-knit little pod for a bit, especially in the day loop on that second day. A lot of us running together, sharing stories, and things start to get a little hazy going into the later hours of that second day.
Yeah.
As in, even having conversations with people starts to get a little difficult. At least for me, I really have to think when I'm that tired. So the second day was hotter than the first. It felt rockier than it did on day one. Everything gets a little bit more extreme on day 2. So into the night, when the crew jumped in, the other runners' crew jumped in and started helping out over in my tent. I was incredibly grateful for them. And just because the mind starts going, you start forgetting that you needed to put gloves on or whatever it may be. You're out on the loop. Well, you can't go back and get them.
Yeah.
So having someone who is a little bit of a clearer mindset to be, hey, take this or eat this or drink this, helped a lot in that second. And even we went into the third night. So... And honestly, the third day is so much of a blur that you would probably get more from them than you would from me. The later hours of the race, apparently it started storming. I knew it was raining. I didn't know it was storming. My final yard was done and the trail was covered in water. I mean, it had become a stream pretty much at that point. And my crew was, I guess I found out later, they were afraid whether or not I was going to make it back. And to me, it was still a drizzle. I had no clue what the conditions were like.
Just oblivious to the pouring rain.
At that point, I had no clue. So they would probably be better to discuss what the third day was like than me, because I was, like I said, I got in that cave and I just did those 4 miles on my own personal miles and just enjoyed every loop, you know?
How did that conversation play out? Did you ask them to crew you once their person had dropped, or did they offer to do that? How did that come to be?
They just jumped over. I think
Okay.
I think the runner was the third one standing.
Ah.
Yeah. And I come back from a loop and he has said, "Hey, my buddy dropped. I'm crewing you."
Wow.
Yeah.
Sweet. How about that? Back to that trail community and people just giving, which I think is brilliant. Yeah, I don't know. That wouldn't happen in a marathon, I wouldn't imagine, or any other race out there, but that's why we love doing the trail stuff.
Yes.
Now, Megan, do you have a strategy for doing this, or have you developed a strategy for doing these backyards? Do you try to get back quick so you can take a nap or eat or do whatever you need to? Like, do you have a strategy in your head moving forwards of, okay, this is how I want to run these based off the ones you've done so far, and something that you could share with the rest of us?
I'm a slower backyard person. I think the one I did last weekend was 50 minutes was my average per loop.
Okay.
And that to me was too fast. At Saguaro, it was 52 per loop. My day loops were anywhere from 53 to 56, and my night loops were a little bit faster, I think 48 to 51.
Right.
Per loop. But because when you start moving faster, you have to take in more calories. It's harder to come back in and get to sleep, and get that 5 minutes of sleep or whatever you're able to get. So I've found that for me, I like to go slower. I'm able to take in more calories when I get in. And then if it's a nighttime, I fall asleep faster. So I'm getting more sleep when I'm in there.
Interesting. Okay. And are you thinking ahead to, at the end of this loop with the 5 minutes I've got, I need to do these 2 things or this one thing, assuming you can still think? At some point, I'm assuming that goes out the window totally. But at least initially, are you planning out what you're doing at the end of each loop? I mean, I haven't done one, but imagine just being a planner, I would at least try to say, okay, after this loop, I know I need to eat something, or I know I'm going to sit down, or I don't know, whatever it is.
I definitely try to plan out what I'm going to do each loop. It doesn't always go according to plan. And actually later on, it becomes I'll be halfway through the loop and craving a popsicle. So I know I'm going to come in and tell my crew, hey, next time I want a popsicle, or whatever it may be. So later on, it goes out the window. It doesn't matter what I've kind of thought of. But early on, I try to be proactive in things, really analyzing, okay, how are your feet doing? Are you getting overheated? Any of those, are you dehydrated? Are you taking enough fuel? Because any of those things early on can mess up those later hours.
Yeah, and at your 50-minute, it's only a 10-minute window to do what you need to do. And I'm just thinking about the rest of us out here. That's not a lot, or it doesn't seem like a lot, but maybe you can make it work.
It doesn't seem like a lot, but I actually found that I had time where I was twiddling my thumbs at 50 minutes.
Wow.
Going, I want to go. I'm ready to go again. And I probably had about 3 to 4 minutes of time where I was like, what am I going to do with this? And I've found that I don't like that time. I'd prefer to be moving in that time and moving slower.
So, congratulations on winning that race anyway. And now, of course, with that comes I think it's a silver ticket officially that gets you into the USA team. So, I mean, goodness me, congratulations, number one. But then number two, what is it like to know that you're going to be out there representing your country? Has that sunk in? How are you feeling?
That hasn't sunk in yet. I'm not sure if that'll sink in until I'm like at Bigs.
Yeah.
It's still such a surreal thing. Yeah, it has not sunk in. I'm really excited though to go and have the opportunity to wear the US colors. It's just,
oh my gosh.
But it has not. It's not real. See, even me saying that, it doesn't seem, Like it's
Yeah, I think it's brilliant. And again, congratulations on that, because any chance you get to represent your country, I think is a terrific achievement. But yeah, I don't know if knowing that you're going to do that this far in advance is a blessing or not. You get plenty of time now to go train and fine tune and build up to the October Bigs race. But in some respects, when you go back to your Seguro race, like that was something you signed up for the week before. So maybe it took all of that anxiety and stress away and you didn't have 3, 4, 5 months to worry about it. You just jumped in and went for it. So I'm going to be curious how that works out for you.
So I find for myself that I don't have a lot of anxiety or worry around racing. I find that I show up on the start line. I enjoy being out there. I enjoy running. I love it. And I can only do what I can do on that day. So for me, that probably, I don't expect that to build at all, because it's just such an incredible experience that I'm grateful for. And to have the opportunity to be out there, it's just more than I could ever imagine. So.
Well, I think it's fantastic and very well done on that.
Thank you.
But I'm also excited to talk to you because not only are you a brilliant runner in your own right, but also you, as we mentioned in the intro, you are a high school track and cross country coach as well. Did these guys know that you made a USA team? Did you tell them? And what was their reaction?
I don't think I actually told them. I tell them about my races. I tend to be pretty quiet about my huge achievements, but I'll tell them, yeah, I went out, I raced in Arizona, I won the race, and they'll ask me how many miles, and I'll tell them how many miles. But I've left it at that for now, to be honest with you. I haven't told them about the U.S. team.
Wow. Well, so maybe that's going to be fun for them to find out at some point as and when you're off doing this. But so back to the younger generation there, what inspired you to start coaching the younger athletes? Were you always a teacher and got into the track and cross country side of things? Or was that something you picked up through running and just sort of said, yeah, I want to start giving back?
So I've been a school teacher for 16 years now. I've been in the middle school classroom, and I've been a runner for only 8, I think at this point, 8 or 9. And I love running so much. It is such a simple activity that's really freeing mentally and physically. And I've really developed a love for it. And I noticed that our high school, we're in Santa Fe, New Mexico. We're at 7,000 feet. Yet people who are born here, they have those extra red blood cells. But there was not a lot of people coming out to the cross country team. There's not a lot of people coming out to the track team. And there was an opening for a cross country coach. And that's how I kind of fell into it, is the idea of trying to get some of the younger generation involved with running in some way, shape, or form. And I even encourage my runners at the high school. I do a summer run for cross country. And I say, even if you're not going to run cross country with me or doing another sport, whether it be basketball or volleyball or whatever, just come out and do some of our runs in the morning, just to experience it, because you never know what little seed you're going to plant or who's going to find what they need. Then it could be running.
Absolutely. And I'm curious too, obviously you're teacher and runner and now coach and mentor to those younger folks on the high school team there. So has it been easy to translate the lessons that you've learned over your 8 to 10 years of running into teachings for your high school folks?
I feel like it's very different. It is a very different perspective. I started later in life. When I was in junior high and high school, I didn't want to run, so I can relate to the kids that don't want to come out. But the kids that want to give it all, I have to draw on my adult self, which isn't always the same as the teenagers, right? That's not the way they want to approach everything. So I've found that I've had a lot of learning about running through them too. They give me as much, I would say, as I give them, as crazy as that sounds, just with their perspective on training, their perspective on practices and meets. And
I'm fascinated by this, how you've had to adapt yourself when you consider the younger runners. Do they need or want things that you hadn't anticipated going in, because that's a totally different generation. So if I went to start teaching people at that age now, they're a totally different bunch of people to me at that age. And so they probably need a very different approach than what I would have received. Is there some uniqueness to how you've had to adapt and develop your training for those guys different to how you were approached or not back in those days, or what you do for yourself now? Do you find yourself tailoring what you do a lot to these individuals? And if so, sort of in what respects?
I do. Because they are younger, I find a lot of the younger athletes will go 100% of the time. They don't have that internal gauge or very few of them have that internal gauge that tells them, hey, your body needs you to back off now.
Right.
You need to take that rest day, or you need to slow down. They are always willing to give it all. And so with the younger athletes, a lot of them, we work a lot on the developmental mobility and plyometrics and strength training and explosiveness and all those things that as an adult runner, I did not do. I don't think I started strength training until about 3 years ago when I broke my foot, and I had no other option because I couldn't run. So for these young athletes, yes, it's what I find is I find more of what I give them, I find I should be doing myself because I never had that experience as a young athlete.
Yeah, I just think it's fascinating how youth of today is different, and the different approach, even in my work, which is nothing to do with running, but it's just the way the younger generation coming through has, we need to work with them is totally different to what I had. So I just think that's really cool and interesting. So now, do you go out and run with your group? Like, do you take them on and be like, hey, if you can beat me, then you're doing pretty good? Like, what do you go run with them, or do you tend to keep that separate?
No, I definitely go run with the cross country group. It's never a race. I'm never challenging them. Honestly, I think most of them would probably beat me. Like I said, they go 100% of the time.
Yeah.
I'm not fast, I'm steady. But I love running with them, and they actually apparently love running with me. I don't run with track as much because we're a lot of times on the oval, and a lot of our work is on the track. Occasionally, I'll take the distance runners out and we'll do something around the campus. I don't get as much of an opportunity to run with them. But with cross country, and even starting next week, I'll start them preseason next week, and we'll just do an hour and we'll go run together. It's not all running. A lot of it there's a little park close by that has all this outdoor equipment for strength training. So we'll do that too in that time, and stretching and so on. But the cross country group, the more, because it's really close to trail running. The community is very close to trail running, and it's very special here. I feel like in New Mexico, and probably everywhere. I haven't coached any place else, but it's very special here in New Mexico. And it's nice to see these young athletes encouraging others to come out and watching the sport grow.
I think it's interesting, just being in a lot of races, and to some degree looking at the podcast listener stats too. There's a lot of, shall we say, mid-30s through 60 kind of age range. If you go look at any given race, you see a lot of those folks joining trail running and ultra running, but not so much below, in the 20s and certainly the high teens up through the 20s. But I would say I've come across a handful now, and so I'm starting to say, okay, well, maybe there are a few more kind of the really young generation taking a look at trail running, which I think is beautiful, because there's a whole vast world of it out there and a big community. Fantastic. But yeah. So now you're teacher, mentor, coach, you're doing your own training. That's a lot of stuff. I'm curious how you manage to balance your time between all of that and make sure that you have adequate prep for the big races that you've got coming up. How do you juggle all that?
So I'm still learning. Sometimes they're better than others. I have some weeks where I'll come home Saturday after a track meet and I will sleep 12 hours because I just stretched myself thin for that week. But what I have found for myself, I live about 3 miles from my job. So I'll run in the mornings. I work a full day. I'm at a middle school, so I have an hour and a half before coaching. So when my school lets out, I'll go and I'll do get 5, 6, 7 miles in, depending on the day, run, go coach. And then after that, do what I need, whatever my run is home. Sometimes it's a detour. Sometimes it's I want to be home quick and I go straight home. I run based on how I'm feeling, based on some days I want to take the shortest route to work possible. And that's exactly what I do. Other days I want a little extra, so I'll run a little further or take a different route.
Yeah.
But the balance can be challenging when I'm trying to rack up miles for the week or fit in speed work, and it can be tough at times. But I enjoy doing it all, which is how I think I'm able to fit it all in. If I didn't love coaching, if I didn't love teaching, if I didn't love running, one of them would be falling by the wayside already. But I enjoyed them all equally, so therefore I put in equal amounts of time into each.
Fantastic. Now, there's a lot of people that presumably look up to you in the running world, especially now that you're getting into this USA and the backyard stuff, and you've done really well in races. So I definitely think there's more than a few folks that kind of look up to you. But do you have anyone that inspires you in the world of ultra running? Are there any mentors or figures out there that have shaped your approach to the sport, or that you've come across and you think that is an awesome person? That's the individual that I'm going to look to. Who inspires you?
There's countless women, honestly, in this sport that are doing amazing things, regardless of what level they are, if they're elite, if they're sub-elite, if they're just starting out. I really look up to the women who are breaking the barriers and challenging the norms. And I can't name a specific person because there's so many out there doing great things.
Okay.
Yeah.
I can totally get on board with that. I think anyone getting out there, hitting the start line of pretty much any race has already won in my book. The rest of it is just a celebration. So yeah, I totally can get on board with that. But for someone who has achieved a lot, with hopefully more yet to come, can you offer any words of advice or maybe encouragement for those of us listening who are more towards the tail end of races perhaps, or who maybe are just starting out, as we said, on their own journey? What advice might you have for those folks?
Just don't stop going. We don't know what's around the corner. We don't know what comes next. We don't know what the trail is going to look like, what our experience is going to be like through our running journey. It varies from person to person, but what I've found is that running is it's just such a beautiful process. It's full of turns and curves and all sorts of maybe drop-offs. I don't know, but I never would imagine that I'm here like doing 200 milers. I mean, I think even our mutual friend had asked me, "Hey, have you ever thought of a 200?" And that at the time I was like, no way, never going to do it, So, and we just don't know what's in store for us and where running or anything really will take us. So it's just continuing to lace up the shoes and going out day after day or whatever that looks like for you.
Yeah.
And enjoying the process. That's one of the things I like racing. I do, but I love the process of getting to the race so much more that by the time I get there, I'm worried that I'm not going to be able to get back to the process.
I like too much the racing, perhaps. Yeah, it is good. I definitely prefer racing than the training side of things. I'll be honest about that, but it's always been that way in all sports that I've ever played. But I will say running is really interesting for me, at least, and maybe others out there too. Like you can have, as part of your training or even a race, you can have things go horribly wrong, and you can have a day when it doesn't click at all and you feel awful. And then you go out again the next day or the next race and you have one of the best races you've ever had, and it doesn't seem like to connect. But just because you've had a rough day or didn't feel awesome that day doesn't mean that's how it's going to be forever. You know, and I've had races kind of like your Segura one, where I've just jumped in a race at last minute and had a brilliant time. And I've had races where I've trained solidly for 12 weeks and it's gone horrendously. But those things happen, and it's a journey, right? And we learn from every one of those experiences, and you just build this bank. So I think for folks starting out, for me, it would be don't get too high, don't get too low. Yeah. Try to sort of take everything with a grain of salt and stick to the middle somewhere, and just understand that those things happen. But build your bank of experience to have perspective on any given day that's either fantastic or terrible in your opinion. They all even out over the long term. But yeah, if somebody had told me that when I first started doing this, I would have appreciated it for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely not linear. I mean, I expected it to be linear too. Like you just, continuously grow. You continuously grow.
Just keep getting better, right?
That's not the way it works for anyone. I think at any level, progress is not linear, and that it just makes us stronger runners, though, in the long run if we stick it out.
Absolutely. And I was reminded the other day that even Courtney DeWalter DNF'd her first 100-miler, I believe. So, and she didn't do too bad in the end, I suppose. So, it's all about perspective. It's all relative. Keep doing what you're doing and just enjoy the journey, really. That's what I would say. Now, Megan, each episode, we do encourage guests, if I can say it correctly, to choose a song to add to the free Spotify Choose to Endure playlist. Usually it's something family friendly, just something to lift you up, motivate you, or keep you moving while you're out on the trail. Now, Megan, which song did you choose, and why did you pick this one?
So I chose Bon Jovi, Living on a Prayer.
Rock on.
And
yes.
Honestly, it was hard to pick a song. I grew up around music, always listening to music. There was always records going in my house. So it was hard to pick just one. Bon Jovi is probably my favorite for when times get tough, putting on some good rock music and just grinding,
You can't beat a bit of Living on a Prayer. It's an absolute classic for yelling along to at the top of your lungs when you're driving along or running down a trail and scaring bears or whatever you're doing. Absolute classic song, yes, for sure. So we'll definitely get that one added to the list. Thank you for picking such an epic rock song. So as we approach the end of this particular episode, Megan, thanks again for joining the show and sharing a piece of your massive experience and wisdom with us. I think it's really cool that not only is Megan an awesome runner in her own right, but that she's putting time and effort into giving back and helping the next generation of runners and students at her school find those life lessons and guidance from her own experience. Really cool, if you ask me. If you want to catch up with Megan and go say hi, she'll be running some pretty epic races between now and October, including, if I get this right, 6 days in the Dome, the Angeles Crest 100, Run Rabbit Run, and the Desert Solstice 24-hour race later in this year. So good luck in those races for sure.
Thank you.
Listeners, I hope you found the conversation informative, maybe even a little bit inspiring. There's lots of practical advice in there, as well as no short measure of encouragement and confidence for those of us towards the back of the pack. Now, while you're out on the internet checking out where Megan's going to be, don't forget to subscribe to the show to get notified each time a new episode comes out. And of course, follow, like, and share. That would be very much appreciated. Doing any of those things really helps with the algorithms, which in turn helps get the word out and increase the chances of other runners finding the information that guests like Megan have to share when they give up their time to come chat with us. You can find this show on Instagram, Facebook, and over at choosetoendure.com. So be sure to head over to any of those and check us out. Say hello, drop us a message, or suggest a topic if you have a moment. I really love getting those interactions and talking with you guys. Until then, make sure you channel your inner Megan, run long, run strong, and keep choosing to endure.